Sanji is a character that oftentimes is either deeply loved or deeply hated by the fans. And I think that that is perfectly reflected in the comment section when I posted my upload schedule for the month. And in fact, I can already feel some of that energy coming from my viewers before the video has even started. So let's go ahead and start the video so that your anger can be justified. Sanji is an incredibly complicated and layered character with a lot of amazing character traits as well as plenty of flaws. So let's dig into those layers. As a child, Sanji was a tender and compassionate young boy whose qualities were treated as a deficit. He was physically abused, mentally neglected, and physically isolated because of these displays of weakness. He was taught that the things that made him human were the reasons he didn't deserve to be loved. His father tried to crush his emotions, and his mother gave her life so that he could keep them. You can understand how having this kind of upbringing with one adult, one parent, showing you selfless love and kindness and telling you that your kindness is one of your best qualities and trying to cherish and nurture that, while the other parent is telling you that you're worthless and useless and a disappointment, and those very same qualities this parent tries to squash. You can understand how that kind of upbringing would make him not have good control of his emotions or not have a good relationship with them. The fact that he's never learned how to balance his emotions and oftentimes will overcorrect with his emotions and with his life philosophies makes a lot of sense to me based off of the trauma from his childhood, this and more. When we first meet Sanji, we see him displaying extreme kindness to the point of stupidity. This character is going to come back to harm him and the people he cares about if he is strengthened, but Sanji won't compromise on his belief that everyone deserves to be fed. In Bardier, we learn that he and Zeph share a dream, and after Zeph showed him true kindness and selfless love, Sanji anchors himself to Zeph's restaurant and takes on what he taught him: to feed anyone that's hungry and to never harm a woman. Where his biological father didn't want anyone to know that he was his son, he accepted the teachings and leadership of the man who stood in as a father to him and showed him love. Sanji's code is noble: to feed the hungry and not harm women. These are good things. To not want to harm someone who is weaker or more vulnerable than you is excellent. But if that someone is attempting to kill you or the people you love, to non-lethally stop them is not necessarily a negative thing. However, Sanji refuses to even so much as hit a woman, even if it wouldn't cause her long-term damage, just to stop her from killing people he cares about, including himself. And it used to kind of frustrate me with the food thing, especially in Bardier, because I agree with his vision to feed the hungry, but the way he would not compromise on that, even when it meant bringing harm on other people, was confusing and frustrating to me because it didn't make sense. But with the context of his upbringing, with knowing that his father tried to squash his empathy and his kindness, and his mother tried to lift it up and praise it and tell him that this is what she died for him. Knowing that makes me understand Sanji's rigid refusal to compromise on this, even in situations where it would make sense to do so. The things that his father tried to squash in him, holding on to those so strongly is like holding on to himself and holding on to that piece of his mom that he lost. And being able to have his own agency and make his own choices for who he wants to be in his life is a choice that he almost didn't have. It's a choice that his father tried to take from him. So holding on to those so strongly is a piece of his character and a piece of his brokenness. Sanji is a man who lives his life in extremes, and he makes bad decisions sometimes because he refuses to concede on what he believes. It's his extreme self that causes him to be so frustrating and flawed as a character. So, what are his strengths? Time and time again, we see Sanji throwing himself into danger to protect his crewmates. We see this with other crewmates as well, All of the crew does this, but this is a Sanji video, so let me talk about Sanji. A few big examples of this are in Water 7, where he understood Usopp's struggle because he knows full well what it feels like to be useless. He kicks Luffy to stop him from saying something that he'll regret to Usopp, because he knows that words stick with a person. He explains to Chopper how much Usopp is hurting after the duel, and that if he treats him directly, it would crush his pride. He encourages Usopp while he's taking on a different persona, and at the end of Enies Lobby, he makes a last-minute save that makes it so that they can escape. In Thriller Bark, when Zoro tries to make the sacrifice, Sanji steps in and tries to take it for him. He wants to protect Zoro's ability to fulfill his dream and tries to be the one to give his life up for Luffy. And he would have if Zoro didn't protect him from protecting him. Yeah, they're enemies. Sanji isn't trying to steal Zoro's spotlight in this scene. In fact, Sanji shuts down the two guys in Thriller Bark when they want to tell everybody about Zoro's sacrifice. He tried to protect Zoro from making the sacrifice, and when he couldn't, he protected Zoro's choice to keep it to himself. In Whole Cake Island, Sanji gives up his found family to protect them, and he goes back to his abusers. And his one shining light in this new life was Pudding, a woman who he could relate to and who he saw a beautiful future with. And when he went to bring her food and he saw her mocking him and admitting that she was going to betray him, Sanji could have responded in many ways, but he responded in kindness. He saw the trauma in her family and the cruel unacceptance of her third eye, and he just loved her. He didn't repay pain for pain. He stood by what his mother died to protect in him: his kindness. In Sanji versus Luffy, he fights Luffy because he's trying to protect his crew. He knows his family is going to attempt to kill them if they don't leave. A lot of people hate this scene, and it shocked me when I first read it too, and I didn't appreciate it at first because, one, I hate the trope of I'll try to harm you to get you to hate me because I'm trying to protect you. Hate it. But Oda has used this a couple of times, and I actually love his execution of it. But also because it feels completely out of character for Sanji. I don't appreciate watching Luffy try to be loyal to his crew and being harmed for it. There's a lot of reasons why this scene is very shocking to a lot of people, but this is Sanji being flawed. He's been told his whole life that he was worthless by his family, and then told that he did have value by his mom. Now he's returned to his family, his mom's out of the picture, he has his abusers speaking into his life now. And the one shining hope in that is now also telling him that he's worthless, or he overheard her saying that he's worthless. So he's probably feeling pretty worthless at this moment. We know that he has, all throughout the series, been a protector of this crew, putting his life on the line to do what he can to keep them out of harm's way. That's what he's doing here. And we know that he is a man of extremes. He doesn't have good balance in his life, and when he feels something, he feels it all the way. So he responds to Luffy in this horrible manner, and we respond to it strongly because he's not handling this well. And that's a character flaw. That's him making the wrong choice. Right reasons, good intentions, he wants to protect his crew, but he shouldn't have done this. And we really see that when he returns to Luffy. When he comes running back to Luffy and he feeds him the nasty, disgusting food, just like he did for his mom, and Luffy responds in wholehearted love and appreciation for Sanji the person, not what he's offering, just like his mom did. He still has to give all the reasons that Luffy shouldn't take him back. Because this isn't an arc about Sanji making all the right choices, it's an arc showing his vulnerability and brokenness. And when Luffy calls him out and tells him that he knows what the fight was really about, and forces him to tell him the truth, tell him what he actually wants, and sobbing, Sanji admits that what he really wants is to go home to the Sunny. This is such a powerful scene because Sanji having to return to his abusers who never asked him what he wanted. His father never cared what he wanted. He tried to make him into what he wanted. His father tried to make him into what he wanted. And Sanji's reliving all that trauma and living in the midst of this situation again. And Luffy can look through Sanji's faults, see him as a human, call that out, and force Sanji, or rather make Sanji say what he wants, which is something that his father never wanted to ask, never wanted him to think about. And when he admits what it is, Luffy accepts him wholeheartedly, accepts him as a person, accepts him through his faults, and says, okay, let's move forward together. Whole Cake Island was devoting an entire arc to showcasing Sanji's true calling and his devotion to live life according to what he values. Moving on to Wano, next up we have Sanji accepting or realizing that he's able to use his raid suit, something that he promised to absolutely never use. He realizes that he can use this raid suit without having a trauma response to it. Now, I personally don't like the handling of this scene whenever he decides to use the raid suit after him declaring that he would never use it because of the trauma that's attached to it, and then suddenly deciding, I can use it and I'll use it for the benefit of protecting my friends. That was way too abrupt for me. I wish that Oda had taken his time and explored this a little bit more so that it didn't feel so much like a 180, but I get what he was doing. So he's finally accepted this piece of his past and he can use it without having a trauma response to it, only for him to face off against Queen. And in this battle, he was made to believe that he was the one who harmed a woman, therefore compromising on one of his core beliefs instilled in him by his adoptive father, and that he bases his life on. And he now thinks that this raid suit, which he's just recently accepted, is stripping him of his identity and his personality and his self, which is exactly what his father spent his entire childhood trying to do to him. This is the most horrifying thing that could happen to him, to lose the ability to choose his own values and his own life for himself, and the fact that it's being stripped of him by a tool of the person who tried to strip it from him. Like, this is worst case scenario for this guy. And the fact that as he's considering what to do, how to respond to this, he's thinking about what a benefit it would be for him to his crew. He's thinking about what a benefit it would be to him and his pervy self in being able to spy. And the question he asks is, Luffy, what do you want from me? What version of me would you choose? Because at the end of the day, the most important thing to him, other than his core value, the things that were instilled in him and that he's accepted as a piece of his identity, is what asset can he be to his crew? How can he help the people he cares about? So he decides to crush the raid suit, crush that asset to him, and call Zoro and tell him, if you see me acting not as myself, kill me. Because to him, losing his ability of self-choice is the worst thing in the entire world that could happen to him. It's something that his mother died to give him, and it's not something that he takes for granted. And because this conversation happened, because he asked Zoro to kill him, I don't think that this conversation is done, but even if it is, this scene in and of itself was a really important scene for Sanji. A lot of people try to say that this scene was a little bit more than a lot of people think that this scene, him saying goodbye women's baths, was him saying, I'm done being pervy, I'm done trying to spy on women, and I think that's a big old stretch personally. I think he was just saying goodbye easy access to being pervy. I don't think that he's like learned to respect women's privacy all of a sudden. But it was him saying that choosing to keep his identity is more important to him than this easy access to perviness, which, I mean, like, woo, good job, I guess, but, you know, it's still he's still him. And I know a lot of people get frustrated with the writing around Sanji because he oftentimes loses his fights or gets paired up with bad opponents for him. Sanji versus the Bubble Girl is a great example of this. He looks weak being paired up with the weakest member of CP9 and then failing. And even though he does end up getting paired with someone who is far stronger and a better match for him, instances like this coming up not infrequently where Sanji looks a fool when he's actually a really strong character can be frustrating. And honestly, I think this is a valid thing to be frustrated by. Sanji is really suave and cool and strong, and when he is not infrequently used as a gag, I can understand wanting to see his coolness be shown off instead. And it's not like he never gets his incredibly cool fight scenes where he gets to show his strength and look amazing. But I think there's two reasons Oda does this. One, I think, is that Oda thinks it's funny. So much of what One Piece is and the layers added to every piece of One Piece is humor. If Oda thinks something is funny, he adds it. And he uses Sanji's for the purposes of this humor a lot. And I think part of the problem is that post time skip, we just don't see crew interactions with the crew like we used to, where we saw a lot of them fighting together and leaning on each other and sitting around the Sunny and the merry-go, shooting the breeze and laughing. So we don't get to see, because they don't fight together so much, we don't get to see so much of Sanji defending his crew, which is where he's at his strongest. And because of that, that means that when he is used for a gag, it feels a lot bigger because it's not as balanced as it used to be. But I think the second reason that his fight scenes can sometimes feel dissatisfying is that Sanji's character isn't about being the biggest and the best. It's about protecting the weak, feeding the hungry, and protecting his ideals and sense of self. So a lot of his fights reflect that. Sanji versus Queen wasn't about who's the strongest, who can get the upper hand. It was about Sanji's inner struggle and further exploring what began on Whole Cake Island. Another fight that was a great example of everything that we're talking about is Sanji versus Black Maria. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of Oda's handling of this scene. I think that it could have been done more smoothly or more clearly, but I will give you my interpretation of the scene. Not that a ton of people haven't already done that, but I'll do it too. What we've repeatedly seen from Sanji throughout this entire series is that he is very in tune with other people's emotions, struggles, and what they need from him, and he is there to be that for them. A great example, again, is him with Usopp in Water 7, which we've already discussed. In this fight scene, Sanji refuses to compromise on his morals. This is a flaw in him, that he would not hit Black Maria. You may not call it a flaw, you may use a different word. That's the word I'm using. It's simple. It makes sense that he would hit someone who is attacking him. He doesn't have to kill her, but to free himself, to defend others that she might harm, he should hit her, but he won't, because protecting his freedom to choose, his values, and what matters to him is a core piece of his personality, his struggles, his personal character arc. So what does he do? You would think he would call on another man in the crew. You would think that he would not put a woman in danger by calling a woman to defend him. But what he does is what we see him do repeatedly throughout the series, and that is to understand his crewmates. He calls on Robin because he knows how important it is to Robin, how valuable it is to Robin to be trusted by her nakama. Again, I don't necessarily love the execution of this scene. I think Oda could have done a better job of making clear what he was trying to do in this scene, whether my interpretation of it is correct or someone else's interpretation of it is correct. It's not super clear, and I think that Oda could have fleshed this out better. But getting back to the point, Sanji knows without a shadow of a doubt that Robin can handle herself against Black Maria, and he trusts her to do what he couldn't do, and now he's going to go do what someone else can't. Sanji's at his best when he's a defender and firefoot and suave, cool self, but thinking about his character from this perspective helps me to appreciate these scenes that are more focused on his inner turmoil a little bit more. But just because he is a flawed, complex character with a lot of layers and with a lot of intentionality written into him doesn't mean that we are required to accept him wholeheartedly or required to like him. So let's talk about another common complaint for Sanji: his perviness. I've mentioned a couple times in this video already that I think Oda writes Sanji impeccably, but there are some things that I think that he fumbles. One of these that he can sometimes write really, really well, one thing that he can sometimes write really, really well, and one thing that he can sometimes fumble is the perviness. And I know people will try to explain it away by saying, but that's what Oda's doing, it's on purpose. He's writing Sanji's pervy over when he crosses boundaries, he's writing that because he doesn't understand boundaries, and this is his trauma. I do think that he is intentional in the way he writes Sanji over responding to things and being such an extreme character, but I also think that it's a gag. He just thinks it's funny. Scenes like these, they're written with a light tone and they're played off for laughs. And we know that this is Oda's humor because there are times where he breaks the fourth wall in the manga to tell us because he thinks it's funny. And he leans on that very same humor in SBS in his own voice sometimes too. And in fact, some of his jokes would cross the line into degrading and gross. And I know that a lot of people get mad when these things are brought up. They'll say that these flaws are overblown or it's not that bad because Sanji would never actually take it any further. But I don't think we're doing Sanji's character any favors by sweeping his flaws under the rug. I actually think that really interesting conversations can come from just speaking openly about a character's layers, the good and the bad. And Sanji's flaws are a huge part of his character. They reflect his trauma, they reflect his faults, they show places where he can grow. And while I do think that Oda fumbles displaying these flaws sometimes because he either leans into the gag so much that it gets really annoying or he takes it too far, I don't think that takes away from the opportunity of really interesting discussions around these flaws. I actually don't mind the simp gags 90% of the time. I actually think that they're funny a lot of the time. But I also don't begrudge people who are really put off by when it's not funny, by when it's taken too far or drawn out too long and it gets annoying or frustrating. I also realize that not everybody is going to agree with me on this section of the video. I don't really expect everyone to agree with me, I'm just giving my perspective. A lot of people say that the reason Sanji simps so hard is because in his childhood, during his abuse, the only people that showed him any kindness was his mom, who showed him selfless love, and his sister, who did participate or at least laugh at him while he was being beaten. She did eventually. She was one of the few people that showed him kindness. And I do think that there's a lot of validity to that. I mean, when Sanji was a child, Zeph also showed him selfless love and kindness, and really it was Zeph who told him, or who gave him that value, instilled that value in him to protect women. So I think it's more layered than just that, but yeah, I do think that that is a contributing factor. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he overbalances and he overcorrects and he overdoes everything. And that's a piece of his character, and that is a flaw in his character. Not just pertaining to women, really just in general. That's who he is. Sanji is a character of extremes. When he's goated, he reacts in an over-the-top way. When he's simping, he does it with his whole body. When he's defending, he gives every piece of himself and puts his life on the line to do it. When he's refusing to harm a woman, he's doing it with reckless abandon. And when he's being a perv, he's doing it at 100. And yes, all these things are flaws. It's a flaw to enable a person that wants to kill you, therefore putting your friends at risk. It's a flaw to let your perviness go so far as to violate a person's privacy. Sanji being flawed isn't something to hand wave away. It's something to dig into and discuss. And while I don't think Oda's execution of Sanji is perfect, I do think that Oda has written one of the most complex characters in the series in Sanji. Sanji's character is layered and nuanced and fascinating. He's kind and selfless and giving and so cool. And he's also an annoying little punk. But his good sides don't erase the bad, and his bad sides don't cancel out the good. What these two things do, though, is make him a fascinating character to discuss. I think Sanji is one of the most complex and fascinating characters in the series. I think between his two backstories and every little piece about him, it all fits together really well. And I think discussing the good and the bad of him is a fascinating character study. There are scenes where I hate Sanji, but there are far more scenes where I love him. And I think a lot of that makes him a more fascinating character. I am curious to hear what you think, though. I would love to get different perspectives on this. I obviously didn't dig into every single scene Sanji is in, but I tried to hit a lot of them. I think that he is an incredibly complex and fascinating character, so I'm excited to continue the discussion in the comments. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays and Thursdays on the second channel where you can keep up with my reading week to week. I'll see you again soon. Bye.